Добрий день, шановні учасники
Hello,
круглого
dear
столу.
participants of the
І
roundtable
дійсно сьогодні в такій
and
великій кількості зібралися
those
українському
who came
кризовому
together in such a big
медіа-центрі.
number in Ukrainian
Я
Crisis
хотів би
Media Center.
привітати надзвичайно
I would like
повноважних
to
послів,
greet
представників
the
посольств,
ambassadors,
представників
extraordinary and
нашої
plenipotentiary
правозахисної
representatives
служби,
of our law enforcement
юристів,
community,
спеціалістів
lawyers,
з міжнародної
specialists in
безпеки,
international
європейської
security,
політики,
European
європейської енергетики,
policy, European
європейського права,
energy, European
і
law,
журналістів,
and
розслідувачів,
journalists,
журналістів, які
investigators, and journalists who
реально переймаються
really
питаннями
care
енергетичної
about
безпеки,
the
загалом безпеки
energy
України.
security and
Для нас
security of
честь
Ukraine in general.
бачити
It's a big honor for us
таке
to see
представництво на сьогоднішньому заході, людей, які
such
вникають в
representatives
Україну,
during today's event, people who are
адвокатів,
indifferent about Ukraine,
представників наших сил
lawyers,
оборони.
representatives of
І
our defense
я скажу,
forces.
що
And I would like to say
тема,
that
яку сьогодні
the
будуть
topic
розглядати
that
наші
today will be considered by
організатори,
our
основні
hosts,
організатори,
organizers, the main
Кризовий
organizers,
медіа-центр
Ukrainian Crisis Media
зараз
Center is glad to provide
передачу
this
для
platform
важливого заходу. Ця
for
тема,
a very
вона
important event.
здається,
This
з
topic
одного боку,
seems, from one
перше
side,
питання сьогоднішнього дня
it's
про енергетичну
today's
безпеку
issue about
Європи,
energy
про
safety of
захист
Europe,
українців
about
в складних ситуаціях. Але
protection of
війна
Ukrainians in difficult circumstances,
перетворилася
but
на
war
війну не
has
тільки на
turned into
суходолі,
the
не
war
тільки
not
на
just
повітрі
on
і
land,
морі. Вона
in air,
перетворилась на
or in the
протистояння
sea.
систем.
It
Вона
is the
перетворилася
fight of the
на
different systems. It has turned into
на міцність цієї інституційної
the
спроможності
strength of all
держави.
the
В цьому плані, я
institutional
думаю, що
capacity of
дуже
our state. And I
доречно
think that in this
те, що
sense,
сьогодні
it will be really
саме така
appropriate that
тематика.
today we have
І
such a
більше я вам
topic.
скажу,
And I will
запрошую друзів
even
в
tell you
студію,
more,
скажу
ending
більше,
up my
що
introduction,
від того, як
that
будуть вирішуватися такі питання, залежить подальша
it depends on how these issues are resolved. And then the further results of defense of Europe
одна з проблем, які от
will
виникла,
rely on that. So one of the
Європа ще
issues
не
that
вважає
emerge that
деякі
Europe
моменти
still
своїми,
doesn't consider some of the moments,
Європи. Тому це
the
більш
moments that belong to
тема.
them.
Це
And
учасники
that is
знають
European
ситуацію.
theme
Я
with the
також радий
participants
привітати
who
вас
know the
зі
situation. I'm
святом.
glad to
Чим
greet
більше
all of
треба
you in
очищуватись від
Thursday
цього
before Easter, you know, and Clean Thursday, as we are calling that in
і
Ukraine. And
правда, і
it's the time
справедливість. Я
to
думаю, це ключові
clean,
слова,
to
які
become
ми
clean from
в
everything
Кризовому
that
медіа-центрі
is
підтримуємо, надаємо майданчик
not the
тим
proper for
структурам,
us.
які
So
не
we are
політичні,
giving the
які не є
platform for
бізнесовими, а
such
виступають від
structures that are
імені
not
громадянського
business
суспільства.
structures or political, but
Дякую, що
those who
ви
are
приділили
speaking from
увагу.
the name of civil
Передаю
society. Thank you
слово
very much for paying your
організаторам
attention.
Руслану
Give the
Рухову,
word to
який
Ruslan Rukhov,
зробив
who
таке запрошення такого
made
прекрасного
such an
складу учасників.
invitation
Пане Руславе,
and
будь
such a
ласка.
wonderful number of participants who were invited. Please, Ruslan, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. I would like to invite Elena Halushko, and here sitting next to Mr. Valery. So today, we have the round table, not just offline, but also online, as you can see. You can see Mr. Hristo Grozev. He's our speaker today. And yeah, so we are talking about Nord Stream, the gas pipeline that is still dividing Europe, right? And why did we raise this topic today, even though it seems that these gas pipelines are under sanctions and all of that is kind of in the past? However, it seems that that is not quite true. And Russia found a way how to use these gas pipelines against Ukraine, and we will talk about that today. Before we start this discussion, I'd like to present our dear participants of the roundtable. That is Mr. Valery Charlie. You heard him already, a Ukrainian diplomat and also the host that is accepting us in Ukrainian Media Center. Then Ms. Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, chairwoman of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Ukraine's integration to the EU. Then also a member of the head of the municipal enterprises. Let us greet him as well. Then Mikhailo, then representative of work of on international cooperation, Mr. Mikhailo. Greetings to you. Elena Halushka. We've mentioned her already. She's co-founder of the International Center for Victory of Ukraine. Tetiana Katerchenko, head of the Media Initiative for Human Rights. Mr. Volodymyr Hristo is on his way, Ukrainian diplomat. We are waiting for him. He will join us in a few minutes, literally. Mr. Mikhailo Honchara is one of the leading Ukrainian experts on energy safety and geopolicy, president of the Center of Globalistic Strategy 21. Mr. Mykola Katerenchuk, a lawyer and founder of the Advocates Union Katerenchuk More and Partners, People's Deputy of Ukraine. Also, Mr. Ilya Novikov, law enforcement, then advocate, barrister, and partner of Advocacy Union Barristers, Roman Chervinsky, colonel, officer of the Forces of Special Operations of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and Yuri Kostenko, Ukrainian political actor and People's Deputy of Ukraine for convocations, for former Minister of Defense of Environment and Nuclear Safety of Ukraine. Let us greet him as well. Well, and my name is Ruslan Rokhov. I'm the managing partner of PGR Consulting Group LLC, and we are the organizers here to the request of many friends of ours and relatives of Serhiy Kuznetsov in order to figure out why did it happen so that the North Flow that should have remained in the past now is a weapon against Ukrainians and even leads to the fact that the best of us who were defending Ukraine are now behind the bars. And we offer to give the floor to a well-known journalist, investigator, Hristo Grozev, who is with us online.
Cheers. I will start with a short story, a short anecdote of what happened a couple of weeks after the Nord Stream pipelines were sabotaged. I was in Berlin 2 weeks after that. I was attending a private roundtable conference similar to this one. It was off the record. Politicians from different German parties were free to speak their mind. The meeting began with a very heated argument. Each side was blaming the other for decades of decisions, political decisions that had led to Germany being in a state of near total energy dependence on Russia. They were arguing who had signed what, who had approved which extension, who had missed the signs. And at some point, a senior former foreign minister, I will not mention his name, raised his glasses above his head to interrupt the arguing and the bickering. The argument died down. He looked around the table, around the room, and said, "Gentlemen, why are we fighting? Somebody already solved the problem for us. Let's talk about the future." I tell you this story not to be provocative, but because it tells you something important that the official German position will not tell you. Outside of public view, significant parts of the German political establishment understood exactly what kind of trap Germany was in. They understood that Nord Stream, far from being, as publicly they say, a purely economic project, had become a chain around the neck of Germany. And when that chain was broken, there was, alongside the formal shock and consternation on display, something that looked very much like relief, privately. This is not a moral judgment, it is a political observation. And it is the context without which the rest of what we say today does not make any sense. So was it a crime to blow up Nord Stream, or was it a crime to build it? I think most people in this room already have their own answer to this question, but it is worth to discuss the asymmetry and what exactly was destroyed. Nord Stream was not, from Ukraine's perspective, a commercial entity. It was an extortion instrument, majority owned by Gazprom, 51% in Nord Stream 1, 100% in Nord Stream 2. The profits flowing through these pipelines financed not only the Russian war economy in the general sense, but directly and specifically funded private armies that were deployed against Ukraine. Not one army, not two. We have counted 5 different formations. Potok, Fakel, Plamia, Alexander Nevsky, and 2 others were fighting in Bakhmut and beyond, killing Ukrainians. So an obvious but rhetorical question to German jurists is, from Ukraine's perspective, if Gazprom was a direct participant in the war of aggression, what exactly was Ukraine supposed to blow up? Was it 51% of Nord Stream 1 and 100% of the other one? Denmark and Sweden, the countries whose exclusive economic zones were the scene of the explosions, concluded their investigations and closed them, not because they lacked the resources or jurisdiction, but because they arrived at the political and legal judgment about what war means and what happened and why, and chose not to pursue it further. Germany made a different choice. Germany is prosecuting Ukrainian nationals that it suspects of involvement in the operation. And I have to speak here carefully, but honestly. Germany is a country of rule of law. It's a Rechtsstaat. It operates through formal legal procedures. They're independent, sometimes almost as a reflex. I understand this very well. I was part of it. In the murder case against Vadym Ivchenko, Putin's favorite killer, in Berlin, I was a protected witness. My identity was supposed to be protected and concealed, and it was, in a very German way. In the formal indictment documents, I appeared as witness G. I was described as living in Vienna, working for Bellingcat, speaking Bulgarian and Estonian and Russian. I don't think there were many other people with that description, but the letter of the protocol had been observed, the box had been ticked, and this is German legal precision at its finest. There is a profound irony here that must be named. By prosecuting this case with the thoroughness of the German legal culture, Germany is in fact conducting the investigation for the FSB, the investigation that the FSB cannot conduct on itself. Think about what this means. The FSB, after all, has a pressing institutional interest in knowing exactly what happened, who planned it, who executed it, who knew. And every piece of evidence that emerges from the German prosecution helps the FSB refine its findings, while also, and this is the part that keeps me worried and awake, potentially pointing fingers at people who are still alive, still free, still reachable, and living in a world where Russian assassination units have demonstrated their willingness to travel very far to eliminate targets. The only silver lining here is that the FSB are afraid of telling Putin the truth, that it was not the CIA with billions of money, but a small group of Ukrainians that may be behind the operation that hurt Putin's pride like nothing before. I'm not suggesting here that Germany is acting in bad faith. I'm suggesting that the formalism in this context has consequences that extend way beyond the courtroom in Germany, and that doing Russia's investigative work for it, inadvertently, is not a neutral act. And now let me turn to the last dimension of this story, which I think is not appreciated enough in Europe. The danger is not over. Unlike what that German politician said, let's talk about the future, but the past is not disappearing. The threat was simply changed and was put on the side. Because today, as we are meeting here, there are investors, some of them American, who are making offers. They're trying to revive Nord Stream, the infrastructure of Nord Stream under a new name, a new legal and commercial architecture. The framing around it is very creative. There would no longer be a Gazprom pipeline. It would be under new ownership. It would carry American LNG for now, not Russian gas. It would be, they argue, a strategic asset for European energy security. I want to be precise. If this was genuinely true or possible, if these pipelines could really be separated from the political and economic network that they were built to serve, this might warrant a serious conversation. But this, in my view, is not possible. Infrastructure does not become neutral by changing its ownership on paper. A pipeline that was built to bypass Ukraine, to eliminate its transit role, to concentrate European dependence on a single supplier and a single route, that pipeline carries the political function in its steel, not in the shareholder registry. And what these proposals represent, in my opinion, is not innovation. It is not normalization. It is the restoration of the old conditions and the old dependence. And the good news is Germany has so far held firm on this. The political will to resist these proposals, to ban Nord Stream forever, have not collapsed. The lesson of Nord Stream has not been forgotten. But this is not something that we should take for granted. It is something for Germany to defend and for other European partners to remind Germany loud and explicitly in forums like this one. Because the pressure will not diminish, energy prices remain high, industry lobbies and Russian lobbies are very patient, and they have long arms and deep pockets. And I will stop at that, and I'm open for any questions that may address any of the points I made. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hristo. Чи може хтось має питання на уточнення до нашого
There are some questions, some clarifying questions to our speakers, and then we can start the discussion on its content.
I have one question, the last one. For your opinion, is the Nord Stream 1 and 2 the finally done case, or the Russian Federation try to use these streams against Ukraine, not just only for those cases with Sergei Kuznetsov, but for the future, like they shouldn't give back the money for the result of this war, because they lost the money by this first and second Nord Streams for this case.
Yes, I think this is a very plausible scenario. Russia has at least two other ways to make use of the infrastructure that it lost. One is essentially to create, inside Germany in particular, more anti-Ukrainian feelings, and to provide support for its favorite political party and political candidates, the far right, and some far left parties that in the Horseshoe Coalition seem to align with Russian interests. So that's goal number one. And goal number two, of course, is to use what it will calculate as billions and trillions of losses as something to deduct from future reparation costs against Russia. And of course, the only way to avoid this is to for an appropriate legal forum in Europe to assess that this act, the sabotage against the pipelines, was a legitimate measure against a legitimate military target. And in that case, Russia will lose that argument.
Що ж, якщо більше немає запитань, будемо відпускати.
If there are no more questions, yeah, we have some. Please use the microphone and present yourself. Yeah, I know that our time is really limited, so just literally one brief question, because we have a huge number and we have huge difference.
The former military diplomat, colonel retired of the general staff. The short question: 3 years ago, in Ukrinform, there was conducted a round table where the question by experts was mentioned that this Nord Stream diameter and capsule inside this Nord Stream allowed the Russian Federation to send a lot of kilograms of drugs. What do you, Bellingcat knows about that? Thank you.
The only broader answer to this question is that we know that a lot of FSB organized activities currently, at least in the last 2 years, are using drug distribution channels to fund their own sabotage operations in Europe. But I do not have any information about Nord Stream in particular being related to drug activity. But again, generally speaking, and this is a matter of serious concern, the same drug distribution channels that cross borders in Europe are currently weaponized to finance the war against Europe and to finance the sabotage operations, especially against entities in Europe that are providing support to Ukraine.
Mr. Hristo, thank you very much for your in taking our invitation. See you in future. I hope so. Good. Have you a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Actually, I would like to invite Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze to discussion. During the final stage of construction of the stream, you were in Ukrainian government, and I know from the news that you were taking care of and you were trying to interact with European and American partners in order to stop the construction of the North Flow, which is still a dilemma and is still a threat. In your opinion, was it economic project, what Germany was insisting on earlier on, or that was the weapon against Europe? And is that just energy weapon? Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I would like to say sorry because I will have to leave physically the discussion, but I will continue listening to you, the discussion online. And thank you very much for this reminder. You know, I guess we cannot calculate the number of formats of negotiation formats and public speeches and some non-public discussions that representatives of Ukrainian government, actually the president of Ukraine and the parliament of that convocation and different NGOs, how much efforts were put in order to explain primarily to our German colleagues that Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 have just a little bit in common with economic projects, that it's geopolitical weapon of Kremlin that is targeted primarily at destroying this transit shield of Ukraine and to undermine the safety of Europe. And we learned with a very scary price and horrible price that the free cheese is intended only to catch the mice, and we try to warn our partners that actually Russia has totally different goals when building not the development of their interaction and trade with European Union via Germany. And this North Flow 1 and 2 was built to the money of Gazprom with the, so to say, with the help of Berlin, and it is a serious threat to security of the European Union, and it takes off the Ukraine partial shield of potential interest of Russia not to attack Ukraine. We were saying that directly out loud, and actually these arguments, well, they just didn't find feedback in our partners. I will be honest, because that was extremely difficult. We were considered to be some alarmists, that we are exaggerating, we don't understand, we are not objective from the point of view that Russia is already having war against us since 2014. And that is why the arguments from Ukrainians, they contain subjective issues, because we are in war and we don't understand the general picture, we don't understand all of that interest, and just the prolongation of policy of the European Union that I hope now there is the understanding that it was a big mistake, that via trade with Russia you somehow can impact its normality. Yeah, I will say that. Not literally, but I hope that up to today, European Union feels the consequences of their decisions. Because, when someone is saying that 3 years ago there was a crime committed on exploding those North flows, but I think the crime was committed earlier by Russian Federation. Back to the times when, with the support of separate politicians, with the support of a certain governments, when they could build these North flows and kind of just pull or lie to our European colleagues about their real intentions that were not revealed for a longer time. And as of today, it still remains for us, I think, the issue of recognition of that responsibility, because one thing, it's an investigation. And Mr. Hristo mentioned that why is that critical? Why Denmark and Sweden, in whose waters that explosion happened, why did they close their investigations? Why Polish court did not give the other actor in this case, and they did not allow their extradition to Germany, and Polish prosecution did not say anything about the decision. So still, that's the position. And maybe the in-depth understanding of what was happening actually and what is the primary reason of those problems that we have as of today, including in Ukraine as a full-scale war against Russian Federation. And I think that in many parts of German and European politicum, there's recognition of what a wrong step that was. Maybe we will hear the public recognition of those who were making these decisions, but I think that as of today, we don't see that. And it doesn't mean that we shall just sit and do nothing, or it doesn't mean that we have to just stop having our understanding. And I think it is much more objective in this situation, and to ensure the fact that Ukraine, which already is part of the safety for European Union and European community and European continent, and it is recognized by our partners, so that with their voice to be able, well, giving our understanding of threats and challenges so that we can help build safe Europe in the future. Thank you very much. So you agree with the dilemma raised by Christoph that the crime was not the explosion, no matter who did that, but the construction. And maybe this case is a way to distract attention from the problem, the construction, or the fact that the pipeline was out of order. So European politicum is not able to come to the conclusion that the crime was construction and not the fact that it suffered functioning. Well, the issue is in the primary reason, and till we see the primary reason, how it started and why this explosion happened. So till then, we might be mistaken all the time in what and how we are interpreting and how that is happening. Now I will allow myself to make a different parallel. All the time, I hear voices in Europe, and all the time I'm correcting my European colleagues regarding the fact that war has started in 2022. That irritates me so much, and it has so much feelings in me, because it's the offense. Many of us are having this scary marathon since 2014, and we are counteracting Russian aggression against Ukraine. And we know when these hostilities against Ukraine started with the annexion of Crimea and attack to the east of Ukraine. And all these manipulations that happened back then, do you remember? For quite some time, we had to explain that there are no separatists, there is no national conflict, there is no civil war in Ukraine, etc., because we've gone through all of that. But our colleagues in Europe now really want to comfortably forget that the war has started in 2014 and that potentially or possibly certain things, well, here in Ukraine, but also the same way in Europe, not the reaction that is not harsh enough. Or, for example, no enough pressure of sanctions to Russia, interpretation of this aggression, and that this aggression cannot happen further on. So everything that happened till before 2022, it led to this situation in 2022. So this uncomfortable truth, not many people want to recognize that, and many people want to talk about that. Everybody is happy because of the fact that we are very grateful. I'm not now trying to make the input of other countries smaller, but all the countries that are providing huge amounts, and they are providing us huge support starting from 2022, but inaction, weak reaction, and no understanding of real motives and interests between 2014 and 2022, all of that was part of the reasons of the war, and that destructions that we see nowadays from Russian Federation. So that is the same process. If we are talking about construction of the North Flow and when it was destroyed, it is very inconvenient to recognize that you did something that is so wrong for Europe's safety. So fighting for our survival, for you and us, and for the capability to be part of European community, it's the only way for us. Because at the same time, we will have to teach our colleagues to recognize the bitter truth where necessary in order to draw the right conclusions and do the right actions in the future in order to ensure, I'm sorry for the tautology, to ensure safety in the future. Yeah, literally like 30 seconds. Answer to 15 seconds of question. So Mr. Christoph said that the only way how we can make the North Flow, how we can stop using the North Flow is to make that a legitimate military target. I think that it is a very serious progress. It would be a very serious progress and very valuable progress that will give us the opportunity to kind of put all the dots in place. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Volodymyr Hristo. There was a case that Ukraine was blamed in biases, that we cannot think clearly because we had the annexion of Crimea and part of Donetsk and Luhansk regions were captured. So it's like we were exaggerating when talking about the North Flow, but the first Northern Flow was built before all these events, before 2011. And actually, you were the Minister of Foreign Affairs and first deputy of the Secretary of the Council of National Security of Ukraine. So how did Ukraine assess the construction back then and the attitude of Germans and Russians that it's economic project? What kind of arguments did we have? And did we have a chance not to stop these events from happening, actually? Or Europe had to learn this lesson and Ukraine had to pay this bitter price? Thank you, Mr. Ruslan. Sorry for the short delay. To be honest, I could not park. So, maybe I will start from the far place, 19th December 1991. I was a witness of this event, and the event was the delegation of Ukraine with Minister Zlanko, who was a minister at the time. The delegation included the head of the committee, Dmytro Vasilievich Pavlichko, and another person from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and me, and we came to Bonn in order to start the new page of Ukrainian and German relationship. So 19 days since people of Ukraine confirmed during referendum that Ukraine is an independent country. So we are accepted, everything looks wonderful. However, to the direct question when Germany will recognize Ukraine as an independent country, we get the answer. Well, how Moscow will react to this? So easy, so simple, and banal. Like, okay, you can have a referendum, but the decisions are made not in Kyiv, but in Moscow. So we'll see, we'll wait, and only after the flag of the Soviet Union was taken off the Taxstock on Kremlin, then, step by step, the process of reconsidering has started of what has happened. Why do I say that? Because, dear friends, I've been working in Germany for quite some time, and I understand perfectly German psychology and the relationship and attitude, I would say, of Germans to Russia. Let us not forget another moment that Germany and in German understanding, they have this responsibility and the feeling of guilt of German, but not to Ukraine or Belarus, but to Moscow, to Russia, Rusland. And Rusland in German understanding is everything that used to be the former Soviet Union. So to do something that can, well, that maybe they won't like in Moscow, at least at the beginning that we are talking about, it was almost impossible because that was not in line with the parameters, etc., etc. If you remember all the post-Soviet space, and we felt that in Bonn when working there, it was clearly perceived exclusively via the prism of Moscow. First to Moscow, and what Moscow says, then we will just focus on that with our new like nations, new states, etc. And now, a bit aside, a bit to the front of it, what is the Putin's goal regarding Europe? Right? Let us ask such a global question. The goal is simple: to destroy European Union and NATO. Which country in Europe is and was most powerful? Germany. That is objective fact. Therefore, to take the Germany in order for the Germany to be kind of their friend, so to say, it was the main dream of Putin during all those times when he is having the power. So the practical result of his work is that he is thinking how to work with Germans so that they are kind of dependent. First of all, mentally they are dependent on their crimes in the past, etc., but that was transformed only to Moscow. And economically, they are offering wonderful option. We Russians, yes, President Zelensky says, we are kind of buying Germany easily for Soviet gas. We are selling you gas with a dumping price, and you get colossal profit from this. How does business work? If the self-cost of your product is smaller, then you have competitive advantage. So Putin made presents to Germany because Germany started earning on this cheap gas. And after that, giving all these other things all over Europe. So isn't it a serious operation when you have to go to the biggest country, neutralize that, and then do everything that can be done much easier? So see, all these things that we are mentioning, that is just one small part of that general concept that was built in Moscow regarding Germany for many, many years. As for our reaction, I, together with Ms. Merkel, when she was minister, I had a very long and difficult, like 2-hour discussion. There were the three of us, she, her assistant, and me, and there were different topics for discussion, and I will be honest that partially we were also talking about these things. However, I just did not feel the wish to look at the moments that we are talking about right now, to look at that from the point of view of the interest. I'm not even talking about Ukraine, but interest of those who were there in the European Union, etc. And to be honest, the chances that in this situation we can gain some results, I think we had no chance at all. And therefore, thinking that at that moment, and that was the period of our internal political tension also, and by the way, you know that one of our significant political actors was doing everything in order for the line of President Yushchenko's policy was just destroyed. So when I'm going to the representative of a certain country, then the other person with the other document is going there. So unfortunately, internally we were divided, and therefore when there are different signals to the capital of Germany, we get appropriate results. Can you please be very brief, like 45 seconds? But the North flow, from what you mentioned, from the very beginning, where the tool strategically making Germany dependent on the will of Moscow, and they were loyal to Moscow because of the trauma of the Second World War. And that was not the economic project, but it was a tool as a weapon to weaken Europe, right? And if we are talking about full substitution of transition, what Mr. Hristo mentioned, when the capacity is built, that is depriving the need gas. So it opens the prospect for full-scale invasion because they can trade without Ukraine. Exactly. That's my response. Very brief. Thank you very much for this kind of excursion into the past, because I think many people didn't know even these facts. So it looks like before recognition of independence, there was systemic work on making Germany dependent on Moscow. And if we consider this case that we have with Serhiy Kuznetsov, then we can assume that a dependent justice, so what Hristo was mentioning, that they are now persecuting Serhiy on purpose so that later on they can demand what was mentioned, like the gains, the lost gains, because they will say that we won't pay reparations because we've lost some gains because of this. Well, you know, German political system is probably the most complicated one in the world because, like, it's very difficult to figure out how that works, but it is very fast and with good results. So there are certain procedures that they have to go through, and I don't think that the decision will come to some difficult sentences for our citizens. And I think that it's just a process. And at the end, step by step, that will just end with nothing. Mr. Valeri, I wanted to also talk to you because Ms. Ivanna has left already. But I remember the process and taking USA, or an attempt, right, as when Churchill tried to get them into the Second World War, the US, so that the interest of the US in stopping the flows were constant. And you, as a person who understands perfectly well the processes in Washington, what is the place, because as a diplomat who is working with all of that, what was the place of Washington? Like enough engagement to stop and to work on these flows? Would it have been, like, was it possible just to stop these north flows and to make Germany not interested? Thank you very much for the floor given to me, because I didn't even expect that I will speak, but these topics are very important that you're raising. Mr. Minister explained that it's not a briefing, it's roundtable, so I will allow myself maybe some assessments that can be a bit different. So first of all, I think that the focus that I've heard in speeches regarding Germany have to be considered, so to say, in time and space. The positions that were there at the beginning, what was mentioned by the previous speaker, the positions that were in 2021 and the position that is now, all of that is significantly different. And I would say that now Germany is one of the key allies of ours in Europe, because without German support, economic support, and especially when the US stopped financing, as a matter of fact, so they are not giving financial support, but only some procurement for European money again. And German position, they are our partner. And in the future, I see Germany among the key countries with whom Ukraine will be together, not just in the European Union, not just in some security structures, but also in economic cooperation. I wanted to mention that so that you don't perceive it as of today that we are talking here about all the position of Germany, like official position. It has changed. It's not the position of Ms. Merkel. It's not even the position of her followers. It's now the position which is Ukraine-friendly, and position of Mr. Merz, and I truly hope that it will only strengthen in this sense. So even when considering such cases, and in my opinion, it's not just legal, because it is in a broader context, what I started mentioning of European war. And I think that this attack, which was committed, it's not just attack to Germany, it's attack to Europe, it's attack to European safety. And I'm interested in the future. I don't think that in Germany they will consider seriously the return to the model that led to such a situation. I'm looking into the future, and I don't see there neither Nord Stream nor Russian gas pipelines to Europe, because that would be a huge mistake. And that is regarding the position that exists as of today. And I will be sincere. I cannot, as an international lawyer, I can't say that building pipelines is a crime. I would say that it's geopolitical crime, but I will say even more. It's geopolitical mistake, serious geopolitical mistake that led to many results. Regarding the US now, I think that that many people know the situation about 2021 and negotiations in Geneva that happened in the conditions when Russian Federation was already preparing their invasion to Ukraine. That happened in 2021. Back then, and there was trade with Ukraine and Europe, as we can see, and the US, Russians, right? So there was permission for building Nord Stream. And I will not say, well, let's do it this way. Journalists, many investigators, and law enforcement people and experts in the field of energy said back then that negotiations on the highest level between Russia and the US is to implement all of these Russian gas pipelines. They're Russian, and they are violating European security. At least that is what was mentioned, and nobody said that it is not true. And as the ambassador in the US, I was defending the position of prevention of this tool that was a serious tool of undermining European safety. There were some events in the US on high expert level where, when representing Ukraine, I mentioned in presence of all the diplomatic corps and experts, including State Department. And by the way, with the presence of Nord Stream management, and well, as the Russians like to do, it's not like Russian citizenship. I just asked them either to confirm or to say no. And I asked just simply politically, Nord Stream, is that your project? You cannot prove now that it has some economic background. And during this forum, in front of everyone, and that were gas companies and the corps, they didn't find a word how to say no to my thesis. So I would like to confirm that it's just political project, geopolitical issue, the tool of Russian impact, and the fact that, well, I didn't know how that led to war, because the war started earlier in 2014. However, the fact that it was one of the factors that is confirming that Russia was having these conditions in order not to attack Ukraine, that is already the confirmation that it's a tool of war. And I can say that as witness, because Russia was raising the issue of Nord Stream multiple times as a condition of not invading Ukraine. And that explains many things. So actually, no matter how we call it, we have to consider that in broader context. Again, in my opinion, it's not just a Ukrainian issue, because Ukraine is taking nowadays the hardest work, because that is work on European safety, and that has to be finally supported by our European partners. We have also, in these issues, we should have very honest dialogue without thinking, because I heard the notes that causing some pressure or something else. No, there should be no pressure. We just need to explain how European security is dependent on right conclusions. And Ukraine is taking a lot of work now in European safety and defense. So I think it's not the end of our way. There are risks, and there are risks that we will return to business as usual, right? We are talking about Germany because, well, the case is from there, but just take a look at other countries, because we will see the result in Hungary nowadays. And all these recordings and all of that is evidencing that a lot of Russian agents are there now, not back then. Now, And therefore, we have to help all these countries, including Germany, just to clean themselves from that impact, to make right political strategic decisions. And I truly hope for, even though the difficult judicial process, but also some understanding of the fact that even judicial decisions are made in certain historical and safety contexts. So I hope for wisdom, justice, and I also hope for quick actions. And the last thing, I don't know, you consider different things, but for me, as for the expert in international law, I don't have the confirmation of some positions or some accusations, because that also has to be proved. Yeah, that's the situation. So, in my opinion, the country, Ukraine, has to defend its people, has to, on different levels. And yeah, thank you. I know that our kind of human rights defenders, they are very active. That's the right position. Maybe not always the state can do that, even though it has to pay attention to it, but providing relevant protection of the barrister and provide some legal support and provide political support, I think that it has to be done. It is necessary. So actually here, in spite of the fact that the US nowadays is trying to go further from this case, I don't think that US will be fond of the fact that Nord Stream will be perceived as a different mechanism than we are assessing that as of today. Because as far as I know, as of today, the official position of the US regarding these Russian tools, they never changed their position. Thank you very much. We will have the possibility to discuss with Mr. Mihailo about the rights of Serhiy Kuznetsov and how his rights are defended. But I would like to give the opportunity to comment to Mr. Yuri Kostenko and Mr. Serhiy Nahornyuk. So within the logics of the issue that Mr. Valeri has raised, actually, that in order to make the necessary solutions for European safety, you have to draw the right conclusions, right? If you know the diagnosis, then it's 50% of treatment. So you were the head of the temporary committee on development of the concept of national security back in the 90s. You were in the context of energy safety of Ukraine, and you saw the process. Do you see in dynamics that these conclusions are made, or we've come to the point of no return? And when other politicians will come to power, will return to business as usual, that we are moving to right conclusions, or still there are some risks and we have to explain, and this case is subject for discussion, like public discussion about the role of the North Flow and conclusions for European safety. Thank you. Unfortunately, I have to say that conclusions regarding what Nord Stream 1 and 2 are, and in general what energy policy is and energy security, that wasn't made neither on the global level nor on the Ukrainian level. I am not just the author of the first concept of national security of Ukraine, 1991, but also the author of the book, which is called The History of Nuclear Unweaponing of Ukraine, because these are all the documents that are related to the fact that Ukraine gave away its nuclear weapons. And based on these documents, you can draw a clear conclusion that the strategy of nuclear, like the strategy against nuclear weapon in Ukraine developed by Russia, was developed before the Soviet Union fell apart by the core of this strategy was that after the potential division of the Soviet Union, all the nuclear weapons should be given to Russia. And based on this strategy developed by the Soviet Union, then Ukraine lost its nuclear weapons. and energy causes were used because Ukraine was totally dependent on supply of nuclear fuel to Ukraine, more than 60% of income, and then 80% dependent on oil and gas for Ukrainian economy. And these leverages of energy addiction of Ukraine and Russia that was actively used in order for Ukrainian executive power to move according to the Kremlin scenario about nuclear disarmament and not according to the decisions of Ukrainian parliament that has the power of law, and that was the fact that nuclear weapons should not be given somewhere, it should be destroyed. And in particular, nuclear materials should be actively used in Ukrainian energy strategy that we have developed as well in order to do the manufacturing of own nuclear fuel. And then reduction of energy dependence of Ukraine and Russia and American corporation General Atomics has developed proposals or offers, and in 1992, in December, they provided that to Ukrainian authorities. Nevertheless, in spite of all these things, unfortunately, the movement regarding the nuclear disarmament was happening according to Russian scenario. And that led to the fact that Ukraine has given to the hands of potential aggressor the third nuclear potential. And therefore, that provided the possibility for the large-scale aggression of Russia against Ukraine nowadays. But Ukraine, at its own cost, was doing everything regarding destroying the third nuclear potential of the world. These colossal costs at the time, only partial destruction of nuclear weapons, as American experts mentioned that it will cost $6 billion to Ukraine. At that time, our budget had only $10 billion, like equivalent. And we were destroying the launching part. We did not have the production of nuclear weapons, but that was not provided for in the decision of the parliament, but it had to remain for using that for peaceful purposes. But why this scenario is most destructive, both for economy and for national security? Why was it implemented? Again, I come back to the main question. Russia was actively using not just nuclear pressure, but also energy dependency of Ukraine, not just in the field of nuclear energy, but Ukraine, in the first years of its independence, planned to build the alternative sources for supplying oil and gas to Ukraine. Ukraine wanted to create a consortium, international consortium, on gas pipelines. They were going to Europe, and then the US joined that actively. But all these projects, Russia was actively, because of its impact, was just stopping. So we can say for sure that Ukrainian example about energy dependency and thus political dependency and Russia has led to today's life that we have, which is quite sad, and the losses that Ukraine is having. Were some conclusions made? Coming back to Europe, of course, it is geopolitical project, which was developed by FSB and Russia, and energy dependency that was formed via these two flows has turned for European Union not just into something that is done by Russia nowadays in war against Ukraine and is threatening the European Union, but it has turned into the internal political issues of the European Union, because via these gas pipelines, the pro-Russian political powers were financed, including the alternative for Germany. And Orban was born on Russian gas, and Slovakia, Fico, just same on this system. At the end, Le Pen, it's also all of these are Russian political projects in order to destroy the European Union as such. So ending up the topic of energy dependency, it's political dependency and political impacts. So we can say for sure, because in this framework, we should consider all the processes happening in Europe, including the judicial processes that are happening to Ukrainian citizens. And if we are already talking about that, then these are people that we have, well, primarily, we have to honor them in Europe because they are rescuing Europe and they are rescuing the whole continent from Russian terror. 10 seconds response. Were some conclusions made out of this by our politicians? Because if they made some conclusions, then there is a chance that we won't return to that anymore. Or maybe there are still some risks that the business as usual can be conducted between Russia and other countries, for example, Russia and Germany. As for the conclusions, we can say for sure that I'm talking about politicians from Europe. I haven't seen a single publication on the topic that I mentioned right now. Energy dependency on Russian gas has led to the fact that in Europe, the political forces were born that are destroying European Union from inside and democracy and the prospects of European security. Thank you very much. I am sorry we have a time limit. Thank you very much for your opinion, but if we are moving this way, I can't just stop myself from asking Mr. Hanchar, because he is just a top person in energy security. So if we are talking about the independency, energy independency, and do you agree with the participants of the roundtable about this dependency on Russian gas, etc.? Because have we gone through this point of no return, or still some conclusions that are necessary in order not to make the mistakes that were not made yet? Thank you very much for the invitation. Let's do it the following way, because me and my center were engaged in the problematics of prevention, and we were forming the tools of such prevention so that this project and the previous one, like North Pole 1 and 2, for them not to be implemented. But taking into account the lack of time, I will just stop on a bit different context. It is very important for us not to step aside from the central framework why citizen of Ukraine is now in the hands of German system of justice. It is good that Ms. Ivanna Tsintsadze, she mentioned 2014, because when we recall what happened in 2014 in these April days, and I think many people have forgotten that, and the colonel of FSB Hirkin has started the operation in eastern Ukraine, 12th of April. At the same time, beginning of April and almost during whole April and May and June, there was very intense gas and diplomatic activity. Moscow, Brussels, Moscow, Berlin, with the Netherlands, etc. What was the sense of this gas diplomatic activity? That in Ukraine, there is civil war, there is internal conflict, and Ukraine becomes not reliable transition part to supply gas to Europe and, first of all, to Germany. Do you understand? And indeed, Hirkin, his aim was that to say that there is armed conflict in Ukraine, internal conflict. What about the pipes? Yeah, the pipes are going via the eastern part of Ukraine, Luhansk region. And then a very logical offer was mentioned. The offer to expand the existing, at the time, and exploited North Flow 1, that was called North Flow 2. The name appeared the next year when the main parameters were approved already. The 2 more pipes will be built, just like that one. So this is about what these gas projects of Russia are. Yeah, these are economic projects, but it's matryoshka, you know. From outside, it looks like economic project, attractive. to a certain extent for a certain range of people or businesses, but inside they are putting all of that we mentioned. So it is multi-targeted project, and that is how we consider Russian projects. That was a working tool to take Ukraine out of the transitioning, and Mr. Dahilev, the first head of Gazprom, when it was built in 1993, he said that we have to turn Ukraine off the transit. So the strategic line just continued, especially in Putin's period, and of course, later on, kind of make Europe totally dependent. And because of the money that were going via Canton Zug in Switzerland, because the main companies, different companies of Gazprom were located there, but it's a different topic. However, it's important to understand. Second thing, regarding the situation with the explosion of the North flows, and why actually German investigation is taking this way. The question is, the issue is that when the reasons and motives were analyzed of who could do that, then straight away, investigation in all the countries, in Sweden, in Denmark, in Germany, went the same way, that it can be done by anyone, but not Russia. Why? Because Russia has no motives to explode the gas pipeline, because it's their gas, their business, their pipelines. Who's got the motives? Ukraine, of course, because Ukraine is in war with Russia. And it doesn't matter who attacked whom. Yes, there were some other options. We know that the work option of Russians was American option. Yeah, article of Heimar Hirsch that was published in 2023, where it was written how Americans, together with people from Norway, have exploded this pipeline, because for Americans it's important to promote their gas. We can bring some other options. Like there was separate version about Norway, Poland, etc., but somehow Russian version was taken. And actually, if something is determined according to German mentality, you have to bring that till the end. You have to finalize that. So that is why they took the wrong path. And I think that further on, Russians helped them. They were working on that, like FSB or somebody else. But in this situation, actually, Ukrainian footprints, the so-called Ukrainian footprint launched via media, was looking kind of believable. And it seemed true. But what seems true is not always true. And in these circumstances, it is very important to understand that when we are talking about why these flows were exploded, we have to recall what Russia was doing in 2021 to 2022 on European gas market. That is my third thesis, maybe. And in 2021, special operation started on trying the European gas market. First, Demal Europe was cut off because of the Polish politics that has Russophobia. Then, maybe you will recall the problems with Siemens turbines started on compressor station Baltics. They were broken, and Russia cannot renovate and maintain those because they have sanctions in 2022, right? That is when this happened. So therefore, there was request to eliminate sanctions so that these things can be repaired. But Siemens has mentioned that, well, it is impossible that these devices are broken just one after the other one. And then there were some issues to Gazprom that you are not sticking to the conditions written in contract. And you also have some spare turbines just in case, for such case. So Gazprom stopped transportation of gas under the purpose of renovation. That led to a jump of prices, and the prices on gas market in August was like 8 times more in comparison with the previous level. Gazprom was informed that they get serious claims. That announced that, okay, force majeure is happening. We can do nothing. Force majeure was declined. So they were threatened with approximately $30 billion sanctions. And then the situation was created that, oh, indeed, force majeure happened. Somebody exploded the flows. I will not dive deep into this story because even Russian experts, Milov and Putin, they were saying that how this special operation was organized from the Baltic Fleet. The situation looks like this as of now. Not many people paid attention to that, but last year, Uniper, German company, the biggest partner of Gazprom, earlier known as Roras, Gas, in court, in arbitrage, they got the decision on taking 13 billion euros for non-performance of the contract because force majeure did not work. And now, the conclusion. The investigation was not following the Russian path. It was going the wrong Ukrainian path because you remember all this story, like Chervinsky was called the organizer of all of that. And at the beginning, there was a surname of a boy who served in the 93rd Brigade or something. And then they killed Colonel Voronich from the SSU of Ukraine. So all of that says or shows that this special operation is well thought, well packed, and it creates the informational background to bring the Ukrainian trace to the masses. But in due time, I prepared several questions to the request of people who were working with the investigation. Some questions that have to be answered. And these questions are not raised in media anywhere. I will not say all the questions because it will take a lot of time. Yeah, actually, I will offer after the round table media who wants to speak, so you will be able to do that. But a very brief question, 30-second answer from what you mentioned. There is the following. First of all, there were many million claims on the fact that they were not performing their contracts. But if we take investigation of Germany and Ukrainian trace and what Hristo mentioned, and you were kind of taking us there, that we can also add some benefit that was not obtained and get hundreds and millions of dollars, right? If you prove and if you create evidence, if you print on 3D printer that, okay, Ukraine's guilty. So it doesn't matter that it's unclear who, unclear what, but yeah, they are guilty. They are the ones. And then the third party, they can make claim against Ukraine, right? Because yeah, reparations, etc. But you also like we owe nothing to you, you owe nothing to us, and we come back to business as usual. So how do you think can this logic exist, or you have different opinion? Yeah, this logic is possible, but as soon as, in a way, we remember how that can be done, sometimes let us recall 2002, the lady maybe remembers perfectly well. I mean, there might be some claims from the company to Gazprom. They claimed, and some of them have got their thing, but it turns out that there's another subject who is guilty. So it means that also Ukraine can do some payments. So it's like absolute regression. Yeah, the gains that were not obtained, and the companies will consider, like, if they have one more chance to get the compensation for maybe not hundreds of billions, but dozens of billions, that is possible. Thank you very much, Mr. Serhiy. You are from the Profile Committee, Energy Committee. How, in general, is the issue discussed, the issue of heritage of the North Flow, because it seems that not everything has ended up, that there is potential for some regress stories of special operation on blaming Ukrainians. They are looking for some Ukrainian traces if that will be documented, but in order to document that, there should be some legal precedent. So it looks like the case of Serhiy Kuznetsov might be, well, they will try to create this precedent, and then this matryoshka can be packed and sold to Europe, right? Are there some opinions or maybe some reflection of yours to the things that you've heard today? Yeah. Hello. I think I will start with a reflection to what I've heard today, and I truly hope that European politicians they do understand potential risks when they are regaining the North flows in any way, or if they continue trade with Russia in terms of oil or gas. And everybody understands that perfectly well. And Europe understands that the next country, one of the European countries, might be after Ukraine. From the side they might be attacked by Russia. And we hear some words from the US every time they are saying that potentially they can leave NATO. And if they leave NATO, it gives signal to Putin that Putin can attack any country of any European country. And unfortunately, nowadays, except for Ukraine and European Union, no one is capable to defend themselves. Unfortunately, and most probably Ukraine will have to actively participate and defend the European Union military way. That is regarding European safety. As for the potential risks and transporting or selling Russian gas to Europe nowadays, I assess these risks as low risks. However, we cannot underestimate also attempts of Russia, because they are trying to kind of understand European moods, and that's what they are doing in Hungary as well. And in several days after elections, we will see whether Europeans are politically strong and can they understand the risks that Orban can bring potentially. So if they make a conscious choice, then it means that Russia loses in this. But if the choice will be for Orban, then it's a bad signal, both for Europe and for Ukraine. As for Russian potential and whether they can supply, I don't think so. I think that they have not so many markets, China, India, but with China, it's geopolitics, Russian geopolitics won't work because it is purely economic benefits, because Russia needs to sell gas at least somewhere. As Putin was commenting earlier, that the most difficult thing is to have the negotiations with the Chinese leader because China needs gas. However, they create very harsh conditions in terms of price and the contracts. Well, China is mentioning the price, how they are ready to buy gas from Russia. So we'll see how the situation will be going. But what we have to do is that we have to work with Europeans even more actively so that Russian impact should not be disseminated via their finances, and it should be disseminated to European politicians so that European politicians should not get thoughts after the events in Near East, like maybe to come back to Russian oil, Russian gas, because such thesis, everything depends not on the politicians in the EU, but from people who will elect them, because politicians represent the interests of people. And whether people are ready to cope for a certain period of time, like to stay, like, are they ready to have some expensive energy supply, etc. And we will see that in Hungary. If Hungary makes conscious choice, then we will hope that European society is politically adult and understands potential risks of cooperation with Russia. If we come back to the topic of weapons, right, current topic right now, the North Flow, Mr. Mikhailo mentioned that, right, that German prosecution took Ukrainian traces, right, and they even didn't take the logics of Russia, but that is within the interest of Kremlin. So if they don't agree about like reparations, then via private companies, via regression, maybe put the financial burden to Ukraine that will seriously impact economically in the future if that happens. So are potential geopolitical economic consequences for Ukraine considered, and therefore also the issues of security, because the issue of economy sometimes becomes the issue of survival. So on the level of political discussion, it's not quite about energy, but again, it's about the pipelines. Is this threat like visible, and is there political readiness to withstand that? Well, diplomacy is working, and many colleagues are working with Druzhba, and they are bringing the relevant narratives and messages to our partners. However, we see a really complicated thing because we saw how Russia is working nowadays via Hungary, because they are blocking provision of loans to Ukraine, and that is one of the tools. And they are even trying via this case with the North Flow, with the explosion of North Flow, they are trying to show Ukrainian traces that Ukrainians are problematic, to show Europeans that, okay, here is a vivid example that you have no gas, you have no cheap energy supply because of Ukraine. So, of course, Russia will try and look for some ways, and they will try to put some potential debts on us, and they won't recognize the reparations from their side. However, our diplomacy should work with high quality, and in order for that not to happen. Thank you very much. And we were talking that it's not just economic, it's more geopolitical and safety case, as a matter of fact, the issue of justice. And politically, we've heard your positions and the state of Ukraine on the level of the Commissioner on Human Rights, Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, has interaction. Something's happening. And I just wanted to ask what was done already, because the key problem is actually acting in line with the human rights, because it looks like motivated prosecution, even though in terms of justice, starting from the arrest in Italy and then continuing the situation as of now in Germany. What was done already and what is in the agenda? Because I know that Mr. Serhi's wife was writing a letter to Mr. Dmitry Lubinets in order to create some working group in order to coordinate the human rights defenders to defend, in a sense, so that Serhi should not stay all alone behind the bars waiting when they will let him go. Hello, thank you very much. First of all, huge gratitude for the invitation for today's event. Unfortunately, Mr. Lubinets could not be present in person, but the position of the institution, I will bring that to you. Of course, our institution is not the side in this process. We are actually human rights defenders. We are not establishing whether the person is guilty or not, but we are doing everything so that our citizens, no matter where they are, even abroad, they should always understand that their rights are preserved, their rights are ensured, and no one forgets about their rights. And it is very important for us that not a single Ukrainian, especially the person who was serving in the armed forces of Ukraine, and actually many people forgot about that, especially at the beginning. So these people should not stay without the attention of state bodies and the state of Ukraine and the country of Ukraine as such. So the Ombudsman's office is conducting the monitoring of open sources of information, and actually that became the first push towards our engagement of the commissioner to Mr. Kuznetsov's case. And we came into public space right after we received information that in the detention places in Italy, he's not eating. And then we received applications from the wife of Mr. Kuznetsov, and the case of Mr. Kuznetsov, the commissioner took under personal control already the first day after his wife made this application, and we raised this case to the level of ombudsman, European Community. We addressed the ombudsman of the region Lazio and the head of Ombudsman Council, Maria Fardeli, with the requirement to provide, to ensure rights and freedoms at that moment of Kuznetsov, who was imprisoned, and the right for fair consideration of his case. So in one day, we sent letters to Euro Parliament, the Ministry of Justice of Italy, and National Parent of Persons who are deprived of freedom, analog of our national prevention mechanism. And all this communication gave the result that actually the first time the advisor of the commissioner who is acting in the territory of Republic of Italy, he was granted access to Mr. Kuznetsov with the possibility to deliver direct communication from the Ombudsman of Ukraine, and also obtaining or getting such communication and the letter that he wrote from Mr. Kuznetsov to Mr. Lubinets. After all these things, the administration of the institution where Mr. Kuznetsov was, they met our needs, and as a matter of fact, they changed the approaches to the conditions where Mr. Kuznetsov was living. He was ensured with proper nutrition, because we all know that he has some preferences because he's vegan, and this position was supported by the management of the institution. And in addition, we were considering tortures and things that he survived because of other imprisoned person next to him who was smoking all the time, and these conditions were changed as well. So as a matter of fact, Italian stage of Mr. Kuznetsov being there, it was properly changed via our reaction. So in the same way, we are coordinating, because after the active position of the Ombudsman, the Council's work on this case also had some changes and became more active. In addition, from the Ministry of Defense, we've got confirmation that Mr. Kuznetsov really, at the moment of this case, at the moment of accusation and exploding, he was serving in the armed forces of Ukraine, and also without intervening into the position of defense. We understand their approaches to regular citizen and accusation of regular citizen, and approaches to accusation of acting military servant of the armed forces of Ukraine have to be different according to international conditions and international requirements. In German stage of our work, as a matter of fact, all the work that was done in Italy has become an example for further actions on the territory of Germany. And as of today, in constant communication, we have representative of National Institution of Human Rights, Federative Republic of Germany, and representative of the penitentiary system and the Ministry of Justice. We address them all very often because with our mandate, we don't have to wait for the approval of diplomatic channels or the approval from the international cooperation. In order to start acting, we get direct information from the family of Mr. Kuznetsov, his wife, and we know that the conditions are still not the proper conditions that can be considered the high standard for the right for defense on the territory of European Union. And as for his connection with his family and some walks, etc., it has to be changed, because we don't think that it is possible to interpret his actions as a crime, that is providing for being present in a one-person cell and all the things that are used against him nowadays. So this case for us, for the state of Ukraine, is an essence of what we should show to our citizens, that in such situation, after you performed your work duties, after the service in the armed forces of Ukraine, our citizens, no matter where they are, they have to get the proper level of protection. And therefore, our main focus is that we are ready for cooperation with everyone. We are ready for coordination with the Barristers of Mr. Kuznetsov, we are ready to be part of the working group that you, Mr. Ruslan, mentioned in your letter. And our mandate is not providing for the creation of such working groups. However, if these groups are created on the state level, then of course we will take the proactive position in these issues. Thank you very much. And taking into account the fact that we cannot have biases to the suspect until his guilt is proved by the court. And here is like the behavior of the citizen of Ukraine who is military, even more. It looks totally inappropriate from the side of European justice. So, okay, we've heard that you're ready to be included to the working group. Then, Ms. Elena Halushko. In these 4+ years, she managed to learn a lot about advocacy of interests of Ukraine, and he has huge expertise and personal experience of successful advocacy campaigns, as a result of which the governments and high authorities in different countries of the world were making decisions necessary for Ukraine. In this very case, we've heard the efforts that were made by ombudsman. What else has to be done by Ukraine? Well, first of all, we have also, like Matryoshka, as Mr. Mikhailo mentioned today. From one side, we do understand that now the next operation is happening when German justice is given Ukrainian traces. Some information was given, which looks like the fabricated information, because for no one to talk about Russian interests, and that creates context for huge problems for Ukraine. From the other side, we see, if we take it from the macro to micro scale, we have one part of the military who is just broken in favor of somebody's interests. And we, as society, as the state, have no tools how to defend our defender. How should the state act in addition to tools of the state commissioner? Who should be the subject, and what kind of working group? Who should be included there, so that A, we can protect Ukrainian military first and main for this person, and second, we should not let them create a precedent when Ukraine, is getting some problems worth billions for the future, which is not in line with wisdom. I will start with macro picture, because it seems to me that it's very important, because nowadays our partners and democratic countries, in particular European countries, are lacking some adult discussion about strategic corruption and how authoritarian regimes are actively using this tool, not just in order to promote some of their solutions, decisions, but also to undermine those democratic countries from inside. And Russia here is a champion, actually, because, and that was mentioned already by colleagues, because Russia's strategic corruption is undermining Europe for dozens of years already. And yesterday's journalistic investigation, it was very painful for me to read about that, the discussions of Lavrov with Yarto. It shows how Russian lobbyist networks are working, and that is only what appeared in media. But how many things are not yet in media, and many things will never come to media. And that's not just about Ukraine. It's actually about safety, national safety and interests of Europe. Germany, and here I agree with Mr. Charlie, because Germany since 2022 has made a huge jump in their attitude to their own national security and attitude to Ukraine, because we all remember these 200 or how many helmets were there at the beginning, but now they are our main military donor. We are extremely grateful to Germany for their support, and even more our Chancellor Merz, first time, he stressed the responsibility of Germany to Ukraine for the crimes of Nazis. But what is fast for Germans, for us, it is slow, because Russia is committing genocide against Ukraine, and literally several weeks ago, there was an investigation. I don't know why it was not mentioned broadly, but it is the investigation of Laboratory of Humanitarian Studies of the University of Yale. that showed that Gazprom and Rosneft companies, they have direct connection with kidnapping Ukrainian children. And they show the connection and indoctrination, how that was happening, and their objects that are financed by these companies. That's genocide crime. And as a matter of fact, that is a direct connection of Gazprom, about whose infrastructure we are talking here, to the genocide crime, genocide of Ukrainian people. Moreover, right now, Russia is already having the so-called zero war, or the under-threshold war, hybrid war, somebody is calling that. It's not hybrid war. It's the war that you can touch, actually. You can see it. These are cyber attacks, sabotage, drones, and the so-called unknown drones that are flying over European infrastructure. Energy has always been the key tool. And what brings me actually to the second issue, one of the tools of this under-threshold war is the legal war, or what is called in English lawfare. As a matter of fact, Russia, which is violating the UN Charter and norms of international laws and their obligations and the agreements signed, etc., they are going to protect themselves and their violated kind of rights in the courts via the tools and mechanisms of international law. And when together with Europeans we are talking, because is that okay for you? And they are bringing a very interesting document. We cannot join Russia's level. We cannot violate international law, because it seems that international law is the law of physics that can be changed. It exists once and forever. We've seen that during campaign on frozen assets. You're talking a lot about compensation, reparations, but in this campaign, Russia is actively using this lawfare, when from one side they are scaring European leaders directly, they're threatening the heads of some financial institutions. From the other side, they are scaring that they will go to court. And as of now, they went only to Moscow court successfully. However, recently, a few weeks ago, they submitted from the name of Russian Central Bank to European court as well. And now they are going to use this case in a long-term consideration to scare our European partners, and actually just to make it so that they don't touch the assets and don't use the money for Ukraine. So wars can't be won in defense, but our partners are ready even to be in defense. And that is okay. What can we do now? We need to cooperate with international lawyers, because international law, it's actually very interesting and dynamic provisions and regulations, and always we can find some creative approaches to explain some new point of view to available challenges that are taking place. Moreover, with partners, we need to explain that still they have the mentality of deep, peaceful times. But these are not peaceful times. It's ongoing war. And we need to work actively with foreign experts, with German experts. There are journalists, politicians who are actively withstanding the issues of the North Flow and from the very beginning of its construction, because they did understand that it's geopolitical project. We need to build coalitions. We need to work with journalists. So unfortunately, as of now, I'm not ready to give some clear and direct ideas that can resolve the issue. However, in any case, it seems to me that we need to have the most successful experience of work, and that is building coalitions, and that is looking for like-minded people and move forward in protecting lives and health of each and every Ukrainian. Very briefly, because again, we still have some speakers and we have lack of time. Who is the subject? Who should be the subject in these coalitions or working groups? So the Office of Ombudsman is ready with Mr. Lubinets. Where we should start? Who should put these puzzles into a picture that will first of all make it situation safer for Ukraine, and secondly, it will defend the rights of Ukrainian military? Well, first of all, initiative group, the group of people who are indifferent and for whom it hurts, and what is their status and position. It doesn't matter if they really believe in what they are promoting and they can build coalitions with representatives of different bodies. Thank you very much, Ms. Tatiana. You are representatives of Media Initiative for Human Rights. From the point of view of your practice, fighting for human rights and our roundtable and discussion of the North Flow as weapon, a strategic and geopolitical weapon of Russian Federation that continues playing with the new colors, against Ukraine as a tool against citizens and strategic interests of our state globally. What place will have, it's like the action that the activists are present here, you were participating in that, but what else is needed? How, through media, we can defend rights of Ukrainians. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for invitation. Katerina Ivchenko. I'm also a journalist and I am a human rights activist, and I've been working as a political journalist for quite some time. I will allow myself to draw a bit broader conclusions than the State Commissioner on Human Rights. Well, of course, if the decision is made by a German court, something similar to Polish, that is the best solution for us, because then Ukrainian military would come back home. We are not talking today about whether a certain person was engaged in certain operations on the territory of other countries. However, we are talking about the fact and whether, and as Hristo Grozev mentioned, that the North Flow has to be recognized as a legitimate military target, or it can be recognized as such. I will allow myself to say that Ukraine is in the conditions of war. We have our own interests, and obviously since 2014, we've been conducting special operations on the territory, on the occupied territories, on the territory of Russian Federation, and we do understand what are the legitimate military targets to violate their logistics, to weaken our enemy, and enemy also knows our points. And a huge number, I dare say, of persons, of military servants and civilians who are engaged in similar operations on these territories that I mentioned. And therefore, when we are talking about Mr. Serhiy Kuznetsov, we can talk that his example is now viewed by many civilians and military servants, because all of them want to see that if they will happen to be in the same situation, whether the state of Ukraine will defend properly its citizens and their families publicly or not. That, in my opinion, is incredibly important message that we have to talk about it, because Russian Federation, they are having our militaries, and some court processes are happening, and there are even some sentences, and there are civilians and military persons who are engaged in this, who are in Lefortovo, for example, in Moscow, and even they had sentences. They were in Belgorod and Tula, and in colonies in Krasnoyarsk, etc. That is, when we are talking about here, it is important to defend the country. In this logic, several times we've been coming up to the role of the state, who and what has to do. Who should do what? Yeah. So Mr. Roman Chervinsky, so maybe this question should be better addressed to him, but we as human rights defenders on the level of the Human Rights Commissioner, we can talk about ensuring the human rights, proper conditions of living, but we are talking about also broader context that Ukraine has to look for some non-standard solutions to defend their sovereignty and territorial wholeness, and also responsible for organizing such operations, because we know, for example, the situation is a bit different from exploding the Crimean Bridge, the so-called Crimean Bridge, but we are saying that the state of Ukraine in this situation actually has to conduct not the public work, but more of closed work on supporting these citizens and on returning these citizens home. Because as we understand, and we've been talking about that today, about reparations, about the fact that Russia wants to put the responsibility on us, and Russia wants to put a lot of responsibility on us. They want to put the responsibility on us with all the judicial processes and as of people from Azov and destruction of Mariupol. I think that one day we will see such accusations to Ukraine. That it is non-public work, I think, most probably, but it has that should be very strong connections with that person, with the defense, providing protection at the cost of the state as well, in order for people to feel that they are protected. So, okay, Mr. Roman, you were mentioned, and you are the military experienced military person and expert in different operations. Can you please explain how the state should act in this case? Right, so we are taking what Ms. Tatiana said. We are not discussing was it or not, was it done or not, but now Ukrainian citizen military in Germany behind the bars, and here we are, the NGOs, experts, diplomats, politicians, we are discussing, but where is the state here, and what should the state do so that Serhiy can finally come back to his family, and the state of Ukraine can save itself from the risks of being accused and like, having some regress claims from Russian Federation because they don't want to pay reparations for the harm that they've caused. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for your question. It is really nice. It's the first time that I see so many honored people. Thank you very much, Vladimir, Valery, Mikhailo, everyone, because you reminded me about how that happened since 2014. And I would like to be honest that actually the first war in 2014, and not the first, but the beginning of war happened after the construction of the first Nord Stream. And right, and also the pressure to Ukraine has started that you have no right to go to European Union, and that ended up with the revolution of dignity and that first war accordingly. Then you mentioned that it is all interconnected, and then the second war, and I just took a look at the analytics, and I saw that since 2016, right, 7 countries of the European Union, then in 2017, the US, then 3 resolutions of the European Parliament, all they were insisting on the fact that the North Flow 2 has to be stopped. Then in 2019, sanctions, Americans imposed sanctions on all the ships and the director of the enterprise. That is, all the civilized world realized clearly that it's Russia's tool that they will use to cause pressure on Ukraine. And in these sanctions, it is clearly written that this is a danger for Eastern Europe, danger for Ukraine, and danger of direct invasion of Russia to Ukraine. So the whole civilized world realized that. However, Germany, when regulating their legislative norms on national safety, the Ministry of Energy obliged to get the conclusion. In the safety of European market, they had to mention that this is not threatening the European market of Germany and Europe in general. There was a secret conclusion presented by European Parliament and also to Merkel, where it said that even if functioning of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 will come to an end, that won't impact the energy security of Europe. And now we see that he is blamed in the fact that energy safety of Germany was impacted, but before bringing that to exploitation, they said that the risks are non-existent. So we can see we are speaking same language. We are saying that it's dangerous. Germans say that no, it's not there. And then now they are blaming the person in what is inexistent because they say that there is no energy danger for German market, but at the same time they are accusing him of that. So what was Putin's goal when building this Nord Stream 2? Because on the 1st of March 2022, after his invasion to Ukraine, the sanctions were imposed on Russia, was SWIFT system was blocked from Russia, and it was forbidden for them to pay like dollars and euros to Russia. They expected to get Ukraine in 3 days. However, already 31st of March, Putin came with a clear claim that if so he is demanding all the countries, European countries that are taking gas from Russia, they will pay in rubles. They say, okay, you don't allow us to pay with like dollars, okay, we will just stop supplying gas to you. So he wanted to have the payment in rubles, and he clearly showed that gas is the tool that he wanted, how he wanted to ensure the impact of Russia in Ukraine. So, okay, this blackmailing didn't work. And then it turned out that two underground shelters, the biggest ones on the territory of Europe, they were empty because Gazprom was renting those. Heidich and Reidich, the second one. So it turned out that as of mid-2024, it was empty, and Putin was planning this, and he was planning to put Europe to the place of Russia, and he was going to blackmail them via gas, and Germany and Austria violating all the laws and logics and everything. They confiscated these two things, and they were filling that in with alternative gas terminals, etc. So Europe to save itself, and Ukraine was still in danger. So right after those were confiscated and Russia stopped supplying gas. As you mentioned, first they said that it's because of the repair of their turbines, but also the fuel, well, this problem that they claim to have, it can be eliminated even without stopping the functioning. So Russia started showing that they will stop gas supplies, and at the same time they demanded to stop European countries from coming into the conflict of Russia and Ukraine. So those were small supports first, they were only providing some helmets and protective vests, etc. But then when they realized that it's not working on the 3rd of September, they stopped supplying gas to Europe with the North Flow 1. And in parallel with that, straight away in the 20th days of September, there were meetings in Germany. They either open North Flow 2 or Germany will stay without gas for the whole winter. So Germans were having this, and they had Russian flags, and there were all the signs that it's a special operation of Russian special services. And we see how Putin approached this situation, and on the 26th of September, there was explosion of the North Flow, and as a fact, at the moment, it didn't function. So nobody can prove that Putin would have provided the supply right before winter. He wanted to put Europe on their knees before winter, but in absurd way now our military is blamed in the fact that he intervened with the energy system of Europe. But how can that happen if they cannot even provide evidence for the losses? So that is the absurd, and it seems to me that we are speaking different languages. I mean, we in Ukraine are speaking the language of survival, but Europe is speaking other language. I'm sorry about the discussion already during. Well, what has to be done now by Ukraine? I am leading to this fact. Yeah, please. Ukraine should not hide, should not even stop talking about that, because even Merz have mentioned that it was a mistake to build the North Flow, and then the representative in Poland also made that. And then 21st of July 2025, there was sanctions imposed on North Flow 1 and 2, and it was recognized as a tool of geopolitical pressure, not the economic tool, that is forbidden by energy system and security system of Europe. So whole Europe has recognized that. So why is it he's still in jail? So it turns out that in Germany, they have such a part of law enforcement political system for which it is really beneficial. And probably in that system, according to my data as a former investigator, still there are people for whom it is beneficial, and they are giving the window of opportunities to Germany just in case, okay, if there will be some evidence, so we can just return the foes, we can recognize Ukraine as the guilty, and Russia can play with reparations further on. So I think that in this case, there should be a single united position. They should be open in protecting Serhiy, because if we are omitting some information, if we don't do something, then Germany is also not confident that we are standing on the way of justice. So all Europe has to recognize that these Nord flows are evil. So why don't we defend our officer? Because the construct looks this way, just as Polish people wrote in their decision, even if we can assume that he did it, but if we assume we don't have the proofs, but if that was a Ukrainian officer, then if he did it in order to rescue Ukraine, in order for them not to finance their military campaigns that was financed at the cost of the North flows. And they do help us with political tools. All of that was made as an effort to rescue Ukraine from the aggressive behavior of Russia, because it was Russia who attacked us. And if the society still has some doubts in that, then we can show and we can tell them, like, France, let's figure out whose side are you taking? Because we see that Orban and Slovakia, they are manipulating these things. So we continue. It's like episode 2, And if we don't speak openly about that, then it is beneficial for Russia. It is good for Russians because they bought these guys. They bought the guys from Germany. And I give the example when they are writing huge secret researches that it's monopoly, okay, it doesn't harm, etc. And then they are blaming Serhiy that it's his fault. So they were trying to lie to their people, to lie to whole Europe, and then Ukrainian is guilty. So it has to be on the level of officials, on the level of Ministry of Justice, on the level of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. We have to participate in this process, and we have to show the position of Ukraine, because if we don't, then it means that we are afraid of having war with Russia. The guys who are now on the front line at war, they're losing their lives. They don't wait for this attitude. Here, we should show that we are defending our militaries, we are with them, and that then everything becomes fair and clear. And there is no doubt that our country is supporting our military and somehow can turn away from them in critical moment. Okay, so it looks like in any circumstances, either what Mr. Mikhailo is saying, that it looks like that's like in the interest of Russian Federation is to take off the responsibility of them and just put that on Ukraine. So even if what Ms. Tatiana is saying, and hypothetically from the point of view of behavior of the state regarding the defender who was fighting, no matter what he does, still the state, both in the first and second option, is obliged to participate somehow and to defend their citizens. Look, with this position, our country at least will confirm the fact that the North Flow is evil. The facts that we mentioned, that the whole world saw that as evil and was imposing sanctions and warned that there will be war, etc., but we are not talking about it. So availability of the judicial case is distracting European politicians from the fact that evil are the pipes and not the fact that the pipes were exploded. I'm sorry, we have certain, like, we started later and we have lack of time. So literally just we have the opportunity for Mr. Mykola Katerenchuk to speak and Mr. Ilya Novikov, who are communicating with Serhiy, and they know what needs are there. And in your opinion, Mr. Mykola, you will be the first one because you organized this support to Serhiy, and I know that you are informed about all these processes. So what is happening and what is needed from our country in this very process, and both in the interest of Serhiy and in the interest of our country? Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the organizers for the opportunity to talk about that in general and just to talk about that publicly, because actually the situation doesn't look as hopeful. And like in Germany, the rule of law, and it's like, well, they will figure out because there is no evidence regarding that. But I brought indeed that decision of the Polish court dated 17th of October 2025. And it is very interesting because that was related to the fact that citizen Zhuravlev, the citizen of Ukraine, actually the prosecution asked about his arrest and blaming him in exploding the North Flow. And the Polish court has studied the extradition request, and what were the interesting things that they found out. I won't say that the judicial power in Germany is totally independent and that there is the rule of law, but they can actually put judges to prison if they make bad decisions that are not in accordance with the law. So, for example, there was a case when the judge who cancelled wearing the masks in 2 schools during COVID. So he lost his position, etc., and he was put to jail. And that was political decision because for them, judges are kind of going in their vertical and they are assigned, but at the same time, they are interacting via political tools, so saying that they will figure it out. No, we need to intervene into this. And I just wanted very briefly, I understand that there is no time. I would like to start with a different thing. I have a mission today from Volodymyr Zhuravlev, who now is free, thanks to the work of Roman Chervinsky and the lawyers and People's Deputy and Katarinchuk and Partners Company. And thanks to those who supported him, now he's at home with his family, with his children. He has 3 kids, but it doesn't mean that he is safe because if he goes beyond the territory of Poland, there is a huge chance that he will be arrested and he will sit in the jail where Kuznetsov is right now, right? In a place for terrorists. Don't you think that I always understand when human rights defenders they are saying like, okay, we are fighting for the rights of people of Ukraine, for them to live in proper conditions, but he's tortured there. To say that he is guilty, he might be considered as a military captive. He answers 2 questions: what's his name and what is the unit where he was serving? And he says nothing. And the conditions that were created for him, first in Italy, where he was sitting with the Somali terrorists, and what was just done to them, that they were wearing, like, they were. So he had no food, and he lost like 30 kilos. And we resolved the issue with. The issue with his nutrition is not resolved. Yeah, they are responding, but yeah, thanks to the ombudsman and his team that all the time they are like knocking that, yeah, the issue with nutrition is not resolved. And he's half hungry in there. And all the system in full isolation that was created this way in order for him to recognize his guilt. Recognize your guilt. We don't really need you. Just recognize your guilt. Just say you're guilty, and we will take this decision. Who needs that? Who needs that most of all? Russian Federation, who's the beneficiary of these flows, right? And where Russian Federation will go? To UN court. Compensate the losses. And the strategy is visible and all of that. I did this mission from Zhuravlev, and he's free already. He's worried for Serhiy Kuznetsov. We all are worried for him. But the situation is not perfect because it's not due to our great excitement to our legal work and our colleagues in Germany. We came to the round table and we asked for the indifferent people to come here because you saw some activists with placards that the state has to intervene because actually the situation is not so prognosable. Like, it's hard to make some prognosis. I would like to thank our armed forces of Ukraine for the ability to sit here and talk about such things in general. And the bright representative is Serhiy Kuznetsov of our armed forces. And why this person has no proper support from the state and politicians. I never heard that in Verkhovna Rada somebody speaks about that. Why? It's not interesting? Yes, we have a huge number of military captives in Russian Federation. Yes, we have exchanges all the time. I do understand focus and priorities. However, we have the military captive in European Union nowadays, and already now our partners, our allies, how to build the situation with them when the war will end with our victory, of course, but international humanitarian law won't stop with the end of war, but it will continue. And from our veterans who went to Europe. I hope that Orban won't be there any longer, but will be somebody else, and they will start just arresting our veterans who were fighting, who were obliged to just resist with any efforts, and they had to destroy enemy and destroy everything that helps our enemy to have this war and to conduct this war. So I would like to have more conceptual discussion here, and I wanted to tell more about this. It seems to me that this is an interesting precedent created by Polish court and the development and its impact to further development of international humanitarian law in facts of Russian and Ukrainian war. But I will end my speech maybe, we all, and all those who are helping Serhiy Kuznetsov nowadays, it's Anton Hristo and Alexei Petrov and Roman Chilinsky. So everybody who is supporting, so our possibilities of impacting this case are almost gone. So his wife is also supporting him. His wife is coming to him, and she has some date for 2 hours per month. And the lawyers are sharing that with her in order to have, there are some lawyers that are working, but the state has to stop taking the position where they are not resolving anything, because it will cost us a lot. Both for family of Kuznetsov, it will cost a lot, and for the state of Ukraine. And thank you for attention. Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes, and taking into account the fact that you are a candidate to important position. Yeah, candidating, but it came to an end. Okay, but maybe adding, I don't want to repeat what was mentioned because it was mentioned a lot about the legal context, but taking into account, I really like the thesis of Ms. Elena Halushko, that legal field is a separate theater of hostilities of Russian Federation, and they are preparing the decisions and the court practice to continue fighting with Ukraine. So even if hostilities stop, that won't stop them in their desire to destroy Ukraine. What Ukraine should do in the context of this case as a legal basis, the precedent in court practice, in order to make our military safe, because it's unprecedented operation that we had. The fleet, we were combating their fleet and tankers. So we have some operations, and we are not related to certain pipeline, but we were making some operations. So this case will be precedent, so that later on we can work on where there were some operations. So what should we do in order to win in this war? I will start where I ended, because indeed the strategy of Ukraine in this case of Serhiy Kuznetsov looks the next way. We are waiting to see what will happen. We already have certain things that we can expect. There is the decision of the federal German court that was looking at whether the temporary arrest of Serhiy was legal. So it's a secret document. It was not published. And the position of the prosecution is mentioned there. And it says that what prosecution wants to see, as a matter of fact, in court. And the investigation is still ongoing. So approximately this summer, it can be given for consideration. The situation will go in the direction how German prosecution is moving, that Serhiy will get the sentence that will say that it's he who is guilty in harming the North Flow, and Ukraine bears responsibility. We can hope that that will never happen, that we will be lucky, that there will be no evidence. By the way, there is no direct evidence, indeed, of our guilt. But that is our assumption, of course. Nobody said that to us directly, but huge hopes. German investigation is having that 2 persons who will be extradited from there. So from the persons they are interested in, they think it was a group and simultaneously 2 persons will be on the territory of the countries of Europe, then they can use European order and just have the extradition and play this well-known game. Either you give evidence or the other person gives evidence, and who gives evidence, that one will leave. But this game was kind of spoiled to them by Polish court. And indeed, we have Serhiy, who is in Hamburg for dangerous arrestants, like terrorists, those who are suspected of violence crimes. And he is there because, in opinion of policy that was supported by court, there is a state behind his actions, and that means that because of that, he is dangerous, because of his potential connection to our country. So very, very transparently, we've got a hint that if we keep it as is, well, somewhere probably till the end of the year, we will come to the result that will be confirmed. And like prosecutors are hoping for that with the decision of the court. And then they said that if they get the power, they will not only demand from Ukraine to return the financial support that we received during war, but also to pay for the North Flow. And now the situation is that the potential partners who are supporting us in Europe in general, they don't have the point that they can rely on. And they do have, because, well, for example, it's very clear that Russia is a wonderful country, no questions to that. There is a wonderful gas pipeline, beneficial for Germany, very convenient. And those who destroyed that, criminals. And those who were operating the North Flow, they are good partners, good people. So if we don't provide our potential allies in Germany some position of ours that they can use in order to somehow withstand. First of all, we should have strategic vision. What is the legitimate target? And we start with that. We have to end with that as well. Can you imagine if that is not the underwater gas pipeline, but traditional ship, tanker, for example, or something like that? And Ukraine is just capturing that. So we will have very clear framework where not just we, but also anybody who's interested in the issue can determine, is that legal act or illegal act? Are we kind of in line with what is allowed or not? And then under which flag, which waters, etc., etc. But this situation is processed. But the situation with the underwater gas pipeline, we should understand, is that a legitimate target or not? This has no precedence. The precedent was created by Mr. Kuznetsov, and the position that was mentioned by German Federal Court. And here we need to work so that it can't be omitted when the case is considered, if the decision is made by German prosecution that the case has to go to court, it can't happen. So that, as federal court mentioned in issues about arrest, we cannot ignore the international law because it is only they say it's only within the German criminal law. So it is clearly mentioned that the court doesn't consider that the issue on the military targets is the one that can be discussed during consideration. So this case will be considered either as a case on destroying the property. It's just like the person who burned some shop in Berlin, So it might be disseminated to this person. What was there? It was property damaged, article on damaging property. And international law, it's an elephant in the room, and the German Supreme Court, even though they were considering only the issue of arrest, they allowed themselves not to notice the elephant in the room. And the point for making efforts for Ukraine and our partners in Europe, we have to create the situation when discussing the case of Kuznetsov without this context, the right for war and peace and international humanitarian law. We cannot do the discussion without it because indeed the war is going on. We have the military aggression and indeed the actions that would not have been allowed from the point of view of international law but they become allowed because of the situation that we have. I will end up, my colleagues and I, we have a very long political discussion, more conservative position, in particular Mykola Katerenchuk, he is having more conservative position, that we have to consider the situation narrowly. There is Ukrainian military servant, Ukrainian citizen, and what from the position of international law is allowed or not for him as a person who is acting to defend his country. I think that if we have such a broad discussion, we are ending this up, but I think it's not the last time when we will discuss this. There is a broader context. If since the times of Second World War, we had some progression, if on the level of international law was recognized that military aggression is not just the issue of two countries, but it is something that is negative for sure. There is a crime of weapon aggression, right? And there are some principles. If international law has recognized that, can we say that for anyone, it shouldn't be the citizen and the military of the country where they are, it is legitimate to withstand the aggression as well as to damage the property of aggressor and destroy the tools used for the policy of that state, etc. It's not official position. I cannot say that there is some kind of doctrine or tradition behind this phrase or a range of precedents. However, we are in such conditions where we cannot neglect any tool. And I would ask this a question in our internal field. For example, some person comes to us, the person who is in the international legion. He is not the person like foreigner because he is a Ukrainian military servant, right? Because he has a contract with our country. So I would just promote this line because we need to understand that if we are inviting other people from other countries to our side, if we are saying, okay, we are the side of good and Russians, evil, support us, help us, right? In this situation, anyone who damaged this North Flow, it's not just the person who did a good job because they are on our side. It's the objective thing. They did a good job. They did something that is needed for Europe and for this world in general. That's my opinion. But this topic has to be promoted also on the different platforms. So Euro Parliament, and there is certainly like resolution, and our colleagues are working with that. It is not a fact that they will pass because we all understand that our partners and there are some people who are not helping us, but it is beneficial for Ukraine. That is what can be done to support these initiatives. Well, we will draw conclusions of this roundtable. First of all, we saw that from all the speakers and from the reflection, right, what we saw that the North Flow is evil, right? Nobody said anything good about that from our participants. The question of the role, is that geopolitical evil or is that some other kind of evil? Or maybe construction of the flow was a crime or it's a strategic mistake. But in any case, that's about the event that happened to Europe that led to problems on European continent, and we see that in parallel there is a case, and Sergei Kuznetsov's case, who is accused by German prosecution, and he is a suspect as of now, and he is kept as terrorist, and he is accused of that kind of, he is the one who is guilty. And here is a key issue for the state of Ukraine. If there is such a dilemma, what is the crime, right? The exploding this or building this? So the dilemma for Ukraine is Ukraine has to defend those who defended Ukraine. Because how can you take someone to the army to fight for Ukraine if later on you won't fight for him? It doesn't matter what he was doing in the army. But from the other side, we can see a clear operation of Russian special forces. Like, how do you kind of give the responsibility to others and how to return own frozen assets? Because with Belgium, we have representatives from the embassy of Belgium. we saw how the Prime Minister said that Russia is causing pressure on them. They don't want to give the opportunity to take their assets. So how will they try to use this very case in order to return their assets? Like, okay, you see, we also have some damages, like 1-1, and just give us our, and then we will figure out like what will happen next. So it's like for Ukraine, the participation is mandatory because we need to protect our military and we need to protect strategically our country. In any case, in any scenario, there should be some action, and not only of the Office of the Ombudsman. And there's huge gratitude for participation in general, but the state has to work on this case. From our side, to the request of friends and the wife, Sergei's wife, we organized this roundtable, and our interest is systemic solutions because Ukraine is fighting for its freedom and sovereignty. And it's just one case. I am more than confident that if we start looking for some other, we will find some other cases where Ukrainians in the theater of hostilities, they are systemically stalked by Russians. And we have to understand that we are the country with the rule of law. And if we do not address that right now, then all the continents, all the jurisdictions, everybody who was fighting, but everybody who was in the international legion, for us, they are heroes, right? Because we are seeing them as heroes. And those who defended Israel, they are heroes in Israel, and they are criminals in other countries who were fighting with Israel. So they are heroes for us, and they are not heroes. But if these are our citizens, or if they came to our call to defend us, so why don't we protect them in legal field? It doesn't matter what they were doing and how they were doing that, but they were doing that according to order and to protect the country. It will be very hard to fight with that after the war because we understand, like, emotionally, okay, but you should also something understand, etc. But we will not get into details because afterwards each will try to come back to defending their own interests, which is quite natural for each country. But when Ukraine is defending itself in European continent, we have the moral right to talk, to say, look, such a war never happened since the times of the World War II, right? So maybe we need to make everything possible first, not to let such wars happen further on, and we need to protect European civilization from evil and its natural desire of the state of Ukraine to defend ourselves systemically based on certain case. That was the first event. I hope that we will have some other events as well. We created the website, Serhiy Kuznetsov, and you will have information about this event, about the action that the People's Deputy organized, and here are some people who participated there. About all of that, next steps, announcements, all of that will be there. We encourage journalists and the press and Ukrainians just to join, to give a reflection, put hashtag Serhiy Kuznetsov. Let us raise this topic into the top of political discussion, because actually the future, not just Serhiy's future, but the future of all defenders of Ukraine depends on that. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much to Mr. Valery Chalyv for being the organizer. See you.